Okay, so today we're going to dive right into something pretty big.
Yeah,
Veganism and the climate crisis.
right,
We're really going to try to understand the environmental benefits of a vegan lifestyle
right.
based on all the research you've been doing.
Yes.
You've got
Yes.
some pretty compelling sources here.
Yeah, your sources are really interesting because they cover everything from,
Yeah.
greenhouse gas emissions to land and water, use deforestation,
Yeah.
biodiversity
It's
loss.
like the whole picture.
Yeah, the whole picture.
So
So it'll be great to kind of break it down and see what we find.
pull out the biggest points,
Yeah,
most surprising things.
exactly. Some of the facts that really jumped out at me when I was reading through your sources was just how much animal agriculture actually contributes to global greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, I was really struck by that too.
Yeah.
It's like 14.5% globally,
It's huge.
which is comparable to the entire transportation sector.
Yeah, and it's not just the quantity of those emissions. It's also the types of gases involved.
Right.
Livestock, particularly cattle, produce a lot of methane.
Right.
And then you've got nitrous oxide from the manure,
Right.
and methane is really potent.
And it doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long.
Exactly. It has a shorter lifespan than carbon dioxide.
Right.
But while it's there, it's much more effective at trapping heat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's a major contributor to warming, especially in the short to medium term.
So that's something that we really need to.
Yeah, we need to really pay attention to that.
Yeah.
And then when you compare that to plant-based agriculture,
Right. The contrast is pretty huge.
it's massive.
Yeah.
Your research showed that meat consumption can generate almost 4 times the greenhouse gas emissions as a plant-based diet.
Yeah. That's a really big difference.
Yeah, and consistently, vegan diets have the lowest carbon footprint
Yeah.
compared to omnivore, pescatarian, paleo, keto, all of those.
Wow.
And those figures in Table 1 really highlight that difference.
So the data really does back that up.
It does, yeah.
It seems like beef is kind of the biggest culprit here.
Yeah, beef production is particularly carbon intensive.
Right.
You've got the methane from the cows themselves, and then the vast amount of land required to raise them.
Right. It all adds up.
It all adds up.
So even reducing our beef consumption could have a really big impact.
Absolutely. Even small changes can make a difference.
So speaking of land,
Yeah.
that's a big issue.
Huge.
With animal agriculture?
70 to 77% of agricultural land globally is used for livestock.
Which is insane when you think about it.
It's a staggering amount, isn't it?
Because only 23% of that land
Yeah,
is for growing crops that we eat directly.
exactly. And those crops actually provide the majority of our calories and protein.
It just seems so inefficient.
It really highlights the inefficiency of the system.
Yeah.
Animal agriculture, despite taking up all that land, provides less than 20% of the world's calories
Right.
and about 37% of its protein,
Wow.
while plant-based foods on a much smaller area are providing significantly more.
Yeah. It's crazy.
It is.
The research suggests that we could reduce land use by up to 75%,
That's a massive amount of land that could be used for other purposes.
like rewilding
Exactly.
or growing different kinds of crops.
Yeah, and while it's true that some livestock graze on marginal land,
Right.
it's important to remember that about 40% of arable land globally is used to grow feed for those animals.
So it's still a huge demand for land.
It is.
Yeah.
And then there's the water.
Right. The water footprint.
That's another massive issue with animal agriculture.
It takes so much water
Huge amounts of water.
to raise all those animals.
For drinking water for the animals, irrigation for their feed,
Right.
and then all the water used in processing.
And the water footprint of beef is especially high.
Yeah, thousands of gallons per pound of beef.
Really.
It's incredible. And cheese also requires a lot more water
Than plant-based alternatives.
than many plant-based foods. Yeah.
I remember reading about one study
Yeah.
where they said the amount of water needed for just one steak was enough to fill a bathtub multiple times over.
It's mind-boggling when you think about it that way.
It really puts it into perspective.
Yeah.
But then you look at plant-based options like tofu and lentils,
Yeah.
and their water footprint is so much lower.
Significantly lower. Yeah, and Table 2 in your sources really shows that comparison.
So switching to a plant-based diet could really reduce our water consumption.
Yeah, by up to 50%.
Wow.
And then there's also the issue of water pollution from animal agriculture.
Right.
All that manure runoff can have serious consequences for rivers and lakes.
So it's not just the quantity of water, it's the quality too.
Exactly. It's a multifaceted issue.
And all of this kind of brings us back to deforestation.
Yeah.
Because animal agriculture is a primary driver of deforestation.
Absolutely.
They need all that land for grazing and for growing feed crops.
And it's having a devastating impact on crucial areas like the Amazon.
Yeah, especially the Amazon.
Your sources highlighted that cattle ranching alone accounts for about 80% of deforestation in the Amazon rainforest.
80%, that's huge.
It's a staggering figure, and not only does deforestation destroy vital habitats,
Right.
but it also releases massive amounts of stored carbon into the atmosphere.
Which further accelerates climate change.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
But there is a flip side to that.
Yeah.
If we reduce the amount of land needed for animal agriculture,
Right.
that opens up opportunities for reforestation,
Absolutely.
which could help draw carbon out of the atmosphere.
It's a powerful way to mitigate climate change.
And what about biodiversity?
Well, animal agriculture is actually a leading cause of biodiversity loss.
Really?
Yeah, because of habitat destruction, pollution from manure and fertilizers and overgrazing.
It's sad to think about all the species that are losing their homes.
It is, your sources mentioned that nearly 90% of animal species could lose some habitat to agriculture by 2050.
Wow. That's a really sobering thought.
It is, and it really emphasizes the urgent need for more sustainable food systems.
Yeah, and shifting to a plant-based diet can really help alleviate that pressure on habitats.
Exactly. It can allow for biodiversity to recover.
And beyond habitat loss, the runoff from fertilizers and manure creates these dead zones in aquatic ecosystems,
Right.
which further harms biodiversity.
And then you have overgrazing, which degrades grasslands, reducing plant diversity, which impacts insects and animals that rely on those plants.
It's all connected.
Yeah, it's a complex web of impacts.
So what you're saying is that a global shift towards veganism could have a really transformative impact on the planet.
Absolutely. Your sources suggest that it could even halt the increase of atmospheric greenhouse gases for up to 30 years
Wow.
and reduce diet-related emissions by nearly 50%.
That's incredible.
It is, and when you think about the potential reductions in global agricultural land use and water consumption,
Right.
it's enormous. We're talking about freeing up vast resources and mitigating key drivers of environmental degradation.
It's not just one isolated impact.
No, it's multifaceted.
It touches on so many vital environmental areas.
It really does.
So the evidence from your research really shows that veganism offers substantial and interconnected benefits for addressing the climate crisis.
It does, and it highlights the power of individual actions.
Yeah.
Shifting to a plant-based diet has global implications.
It really makes you think about the choices we make every day.
It does, and it leads me to a question for you.
Okay.
Considering all of these interconnected impacts, what is one surprising aspect of the veganism climate link that you'll think about further?
That's a great question.
Well,
I'll have to give that some thought.
I think we all should.
Yeah.
It's clear that this is an issue with far-reaching consequences,
Absolutely.
and it's one that deserves our attention.
Thanks for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
I think this will really give our listeners a lot to consider.
I hope so.
Thanks again.
Thank you.